COVID-19 learnings. The questions are piling up in our mind space, much like the monsoon that's inundating our living spaces. The human truths that COVID-19 has brought to the fore are impacting strategies across industries and geographies. Already fragile healthcare realities have been exacerbated by the drastically changing patient behaviors. Only a new strategic framework can help the global health system outmaneuver these dynamic uncertainties. Through today's session, we hope to unravel how we can predict and prepare to build a more resilient health ecosystem that empowers humans to become aware, feel safe, and regain confidence. Our speakers this afternoon hail from across the healthcare spectrum. DVS Somaraju, Executive Director, SLG Hospitals; Dr. V. Jagan Mohan, Consultant Orthopedic Surgeon; Dr. P. Vijay Verma, Consultant Nephrologist; Dr. Arathi Ballari, Consultant Internal Medicine; Dr. Subodh Kandamuthan, Professor and Director, Center for Healthcare Management at Administrative Staff College of India; and Dr. Edmund Fernandez, CEO, CHD Group. Mr. Neeraj Garg, who was supposed to have been with us, has sent his regrets. Engaging with all these stalwarts is Sriram Curry, Resident Editor at Deccan Chronicle. Before we move on, I will request Akhilesh to please play the speaker introduction slides. A gentle reminder again to the members of the audience to please leave your questions for our panelists in the chat box. We will take them up at the end of the session. And as requested in our Zoom slide earlier, please keep your audio muted and video also on off to enable a smooth viewer experience. Thank you for your understanding. With that, I'll hand you over to Sriram Curry. Sriram, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I must confess, Priya, that as a journalist and an editor of a newspaper that is known for certain courage and boldness, I have seen a few attempts to mute me. First time I found it so easy, a Zoom call takes a click of a button. But that's a miracle of technology. I am actually in awe of the panel we have, and this was much before I saw the slides, the specific details. I have been reading about the panelists for the last few days. Unbelievable spectrum in terms of their accomplishments, their achievements, their passions in their field and beyond. So extraordinary sense of privilege here, Priya, for giving me this opportunity, and to Mr. Ramakant. Thank you so much. This is an honor. My mother wanted me to be a doctor. By class 6th to 7th, I knew that I'll have to live with Mr. at the beginning of my name forever. So it's a double sense of privilege to have a conversation in which I feature with almost everybody else is a doctor. I mean, besides you, Priya. So pretty good. I'm grateful. We all know if we can rewind our lives to December 15th, 2019, just for a second, just try and go back as you're planning your New Year's party, your New Year resolutions, or thinking about life, thinking about your professional goals ahead. What all did you think 2020 would bring? What did you think were the challenges of the world, of the country, of the state, of the city, in your personal lives, in your professional lives? For the first time in our lives, as everyone here, participant, panelist, MC, moderator, none of us have had a year like this, where truly we are all one big humanity. Our commonness as one mankind on this planet has been exposed. Previously, it only used to happen in these Hollywood movies where the world would end and 5-6 people would stand up to protect it. We have never seen in our lives of a few decades or more, within a span of 2 weeks, across 7 billion people, even from somebody as young as 4 or 5 to the age of 80 or 90, suddenly have added the same words in their vocabulary: quarantine, social distancing. I don't think anybody thought we should keep 7 billion masks ready for the next year, or hand sanitizers. Yet this little virus from Wuhan, a little known place in China, has well and truly conquered the world, challenged us, and the lives of ours, every one of us, equally disrupted. And so therefore we will bring that set of anxiety, the questions it brings, the doubts it brings. Do we even have a future? What kind of a future? When will this end? How do we go about it? God forbid I have COVID tomorrow morning, what do I do? If I have a medical crisis that is not COVID, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I look forward to? What are the things we did right? What are the things we could have done better? What are the things that we can still better? And how do we cope with these set of changes, transformations, all brought, like I said, by an invisible, tiny humanity. Its enemy is a virus. So, like Priya has done with the introductory slides, a beautiful panel here, very eminent. But the first set of questions on everybody's minds today are, is there an end to this coronavirus in our lives in some sense? When will this end? And what needs to be done for us to get to the point where it will be over? And as the medical crisis reaches an end, how do we cope up with the gradual opening up, readjustment of economy? So these are the kind of 3 broad questions I have in mind. And I'd like to begin with you, Dr. Somaraju, then I'll go to Dr. Subodh and then Dr. Edmund. I must apologize that when I asked the question, when will this COVID end? my 5-year-old son decided to shout from behind it will. So it's harder for me to mute him than it is for you to mute me, but I'll try. But I'll begin by taking the question to Dr. Somaraju once the panelists have been unmuted. And
Yes, I'm
viewers-
unmuting. Yes, Somaraju Garu has been unmuted.
Yeah, first of all, thanks to Vicky and Ramakant for arranging this wonderful webinar. So, if you are talking about when this COVID pandemic will end, I don't think anybody can answer this question. And what according to my general knowledge and general system, what other countries are going through, right? If you talk about it started from China and move on to other parts of the world, and how other parts of the world is reacting the same way India and we also will be reacting, mostly according to my common understanding. And the only difference will be there will be some symptoms which are affected to the patients will gradually come down. The severity of this issue will come down slowly because of 2-3 reasons. Because our immunity system will always develop a lot. So once this lockdown 1 and 2 and 3, now we are in phase of 3. Once this 3 opens up, then gradually the COVID cases also will start increasing a little bit, and slowly it will come into the line. And what I personally feel, it will be there for at least a couple of years. It will be part of this because vaccines has to come, vaccine reaction, after vaccine also there will be a lot of reactions and on the patients. And these all things will be stabilized in a gradual manner, not immediately. That's what my personal opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Somaraju. I know it was the tough question. Nobody has an answer, of course, but that's the reason we started with you. And now may I forward that bothersome question to Dr. Subodh, who's of course part of extraordinary initiatives, part of the Prime Minister's capacity building team in, the healthcare initiative to provide universal health access and insurance to across the country, several governments. So Dr. Subodh, I'll ask you this again. Your broad sense of the horizon by which this will be like any other problem, as normal or as taken into a stride as another issue like a heart attack or a diabetes, but one that doesn't close the world down. Where do you see, when do you see us getting there?
Thank you, Mr. Sriram, and thank you, the FICCI and SLG for giving this opportunity. I think as Dr. Somaraju just now mentioned, I think this is going to be a little difficult prediction. I think, as you rightly said, when we had the index case, India was a little, very relaxed approach. They said, okay, it may come, and after a point of time, it may just die down. But you should have realized now, I think we are now, did some study with FICCI and FTCCI. We have realized that our peak could not be, for India, it could differ. I think it could be anytime from September, October, November, and you would have also seen states. Tamil Nadu has a peak a little earlier. We had Delhi peaking a little earlier. Telangana, we have still not reached. We are hoping, we're not hoping, not the best, but we are thinking that it could be somewhere in September, the peak could happen. Kerala has reached a different stage. Although Kerala was supposed to be a good model for the couple of months, now I think they are also telling in another 2 months there's going to be a bigger peak. So where this is going to end is a question which is a little difficult right now, but we are also seeing situations in China where the second level of COVID has come in. I think there's a sort of a second regimen which is coming in. So what, according to me, I think different factors are coming in here. I think the migrant population, the overseas people, I think especially in Kerala, the fishing community, different factors are leading to a change by which there is no steady pattern which we are observing. So we may have a general, but I think different other factors. And now you can also see in the initial all about urban areas. But I think now we can see the spread is almost 50-50. Take Telangana, I think 2 months back, everybody was talking about GHMC. But now we are all talking about the district level, and now we are talking about community transmission. So I think we have no real clarity about when we will have that so-called flattening of the curve, and then we'll sort of move downwards, because I think no other state has really shown, because always there is sort of a risk. But there is also a situation is we now have to live with it. I think we have now realized this is going to be the new normal. How we adapt to it is going to be the big challenge for us in the future. Thank you.
Dr. Edmund Fernandez, young doctor, but whose writings, whose works have reached out to a huge number of people, extraordinary, diverse sense of career. Would you weigh in on this? You yourself also advisor to the government of Karnataka, for example. What is the broad thinking in this space where medical expertise converges with government? What is the sense? And also give us a kind of cue as to what more can we do. I mean, we have tried lockdown, we have tried unlockdown, we are talking about physical distancing or social distancing, we are talking about wearing masks, sanitizing our hands and washing our hands frequently, avoiding large gatherings, etc. This is something everybody knows. What more do we need to do from various lessons that can be drawn from, as Dr. Subodh is saying, from different states in India and from different countries. I mean, America, Spain, Brazil, New Zealand, which was an outlier, and then it's come back. Japan was doing well, Singapore was doing well, suddenly it came back. So what would you like to kind of give us as a broad canvas, Dr. Edmund?
So thank you, Sriram, for raising this question. And to all the esteemed delegates, panelists, the host at FICCI and SLG, Akhilesh, Ananda, Somaraju Garu, all of them, I extend greetings from Mangalore. Due to my different affiliations, I just want to place on the record that the opinions I'm putting here is very much in personal capacity, because we are having a moderator who's a journalist, so you never know what's being quoted and what might go into print tomorrow. So I would like to err on the excess. Having said that, there are a number of things what we would like to look at, or how we should see this. A lockdown model, a quarantine model worked when we, as public health people, wanted to contact trace and curtail the virus to the places we understood as exposed at best. Today, like it or not, India is in the stage of community transmission. You can deny it 100 times, but that's not going to make it truth. Or that's not even going to change anything on the record. But if we are in community transmission, the model of lockdown, the model of quarantine is going to fail miserably. Having said that, now what we need to look at is how do we really move forward in a post-pandemic world, for a special reason that South Asia specifically is facing cascading risk. The risk that is emerging from climate change, the risk that is emerging from natural disasters, and the risk that is emerging from pandemics, which eventually move out to be endemics. And India, like country, is going through a triple burden of disease. On one hand, you have infectious diseases. On another hand, you have non-communicable diseases. On another hand, you have emerging and re-emerging diseases. So this points out to a number of things that tertiary healthcare systems like SLG, secondary and primary healthcare systems will need to think through. What is the surge capacity that we at healthcare establishments can handle? How are we really preparing our healthcare professionals to address cascading risk, and what is it that we really need to factor in to mitigate such
Rama,
risk moving forward into the future. So today you have medicine as a discipline that teaches you patient care, wherein you have to inspect, palpate, auscultate, and treat a patient. But what about the social determinants of health? What about the cultural determinants of health? What about the legal and commercial determinants of health? So, from a policy perspective, both the central and state structures must focus on social protection moving forward. It's no longer about daily wage laborers, it's no longer about migrants. It's about the middle class, it's about the people below poverty line, it's also about others who a virus like corona will never spare. So what we need to think through is how do we really build our social structures aligned with our regional geopolitics that suits us as a country. This calls for investment efficiency and investment sufficiency. With these preliminary thoughts, I think we would be in a concrete manner able to push forward our journey, not just in shaping health systems and safeguarding professionals, but also taking it as a civilian response towards addressing a pandemic. It reminds me of Pothan Joseph, back then the editor at Deccan Herald, who, I mean, this was a context he spoke in newspapers, but I would like to just emulate it in terms of healthcare. Medicine was a mission till 1947. It necessarily had to turn into a profession. It turned out to be kind of an industry. Now, while we've created healthcare as an industry, we need to plug the leakages that will ensure this industry moves forward in leaps and bounds. FICCI as well, from a corporate social responsibility standpoint, would need to align itself with sustainable development goals. I mean, of course, in judgment and wisdom, this is a prerogative of each company, but FICCI as a body or a consortium plays a very crucial moral responsibility in shaping these agendas moving forward.
thank you so much, Dr. Edmund. Trust me, none of us could have put it so aptly, connecting the first set of concerns you've had as to what is the horizon where COVID seems to kind of plateau or taper down to become a normal dimension of life, to the aspect of how it impacts healthcare and what are the imperatives of the healthcare industry, the profession, the professionals. But before I go on to asking all of you as to what might be the common people's concerns, I would like to understand a little bit more about the kind of impact coronavirus had on the lives of hospitals and doctors itself, on the mindset, the design, the nature of response within a hospital. What are the lessons very quickly doctors have learned? I mean, to become a doctor, like you have to study for so long, and there's never ends at graduation or post-graduation level, so many specializations. But what has life taught you in the last 4-5 months must be tremendous. It must also kind of made you quickly keep changing your best practices in terms of practicing your profession at a time when its importance is perhaps the highest. It was always important. But at the same time, what are the pressures you felt? How did you cope with the stress on the entire system, on you individually? And how have you redesigned, so to say, your broad processes what you do, how you do, etc. And for this, I'll go to all the three doctors, beginning with Dr. Jagan Mohan. Dr. Jagan Mohan has been with NHS. He's been part of teams that, as part of a collaboration with Oxford, have done the research on several vaccines. Right now, is among the topmost contender to get to this. Of course, Russia in a way beat you, but that's a suspect vaccine doesn't kind of satisfy everybody in terms of tests, etc. But I go over to Dr. Jagan Mohan Reddy. Please tell us how COVID has impacted you, your profession. How are you and your fellow doctors coping with it, changing your practice methodologies, etc.?
Yes. So thank you, Sriram. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thanks for the introduction. I'm in this medical field for the last 30 years, last 3 decades, including my medical school training. I have not seen or I have not heard about this type of pandemics. I have not heard and nobody has imagined this type of pandemics. I know and I have faced a few endemics. But this pandemic has gone over the world in a less span of time. There is no time for the preparation. It has spread like anything, like a wildfire. There's no time. Previously, if it is any endemic is limited to that particular area, the rest of the world, rest of the place can help, can do some medical help. But here, everybody is busy with their own resources. They have very limited resources. They have strained their medical resources. That's this pandemic has given a lot of, it has exposed the lacunas in the healthcare system, this pandemics. At the beginning of this pandemic in India, even simple surgical mask, which costs around 1 to 2 rupees, it has gone up to 20 to 30 rupees. Simple sanitizers like alcohol-based rubs, not available. Huge costs. Simple drugs like a vitamin C, Ginkgo Zinc, it's commonly available. Vitamin C costs only 50p. It has gone to 50 rupees. So this has all learned. This pandemic has given a lot of lessons to the medical profession. It has exposed so many lacunas in the medical system. There is a failure in the health infrastructure, healthcare professionals, drugs, protective equipment, sanitization, how the hospital should prepare, how to handle these type of pandemics. It's like a little bit catastrophe. The people are suffering, the healthcare professionals are also suffering, the government, everybody has suffered with this pandemic. There are some lessons learned from this is they prepare, these governments and the health infrastructures has to prepare. They should make a national task force, regional task force. For example, like a national disaster council, like that medical disaster council should should form. You may expect new pandemics in future. We never know. But we should be prepared how to tackle, how to procure the healthcare professionals, how to prepare that, how to prepare the health infrastructure. How can we procure the drugs within a span of time? How can we procure the protective equipment like masks, gowns, PPEs within a limited span of time? Drugs, for example, if there is an anti-COVID drugs like remdesivir, tocilizumab, it's very difficult to get it. There's some government or some regulatory bodies, some task force should come forward, should make it available to all the needy people. When the pandemic has broken out, all people have bought so many drugs like all vitamin D, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin C, they purchased and they kept in a stock. It's not available for the needy people. So there should be some regulatories to control all these things so that they can available to the needy people. That is my thought.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jagan Mohan. Strong words there, catastrophe. Now, request Dr. Vinay Verma to come to. He's a nephrologist. And I can imagine there must have been a lot of pressure on you in the last, I mean, everybody, of course, but your specialization in particular. So kindly take us through, Dr. Vinay. Can we have him muted, unmuted, please?
Dr. Vijay or Dr. Vinay? Vinay, I don't see Dr. Vinay here.
Dr. Vijay Verma.
Hello?
I'm sorry, by Dr. I apologize for that, Dr. Vijay.
Yes. Akhilesh?
He's.
Akhilesh, could Dr. Vijay be
Yeah, I did. Yeah, he's there.
Dr. Vijay, I apologize. Really,
That's fine.
Sorry.
Thank you for the opportunity. So, one of the worst hit populations with COVID, apart from the regular population, is our dialysis patients, our regular kidney patients. See, compared to other patients who come for their checkups once in a month or once in 3 months, our dialysis patients, it's been a very troublesome journey for them. The reason being, all of these patients have to come either twice or thrice a week. So right from the transportation till the time that they get their proper treatment at hospital, it has been a very troublesome journey for them. And for us as doctors to provide them treatment, it's even more challenging because technicians, we have to motivate people right from the technicians. We ourselves have to be motivated to offer them the correct treatment, because these are some group of patients wherein you don't offer them treatment at the correct time. There is every possibility that we will lose the patient to their respective diseases than to COVID. So that's where the challenge lies. And not only that, we've been seeing cardiac patients who were supposed to come for their regular checkup not turning up, and then we have seen patients coming in an even more worse state and then not being able to save them. So in total, adding to what Dr. Jagan Mohan Reddy told, a lot of learnings from this pandemic. That one, initially when the disease came, we didn't know what was going to work on the disease, what to hit the virus with. Later on, we had issues with our logistics, wherein to arrange treatment for a patient, the nursing staff, the correct number of doctors to be available to treat the patients, that was a big challenge. And then, as Dr. Jagan had already told, in the initial days, the availability of the drugs, like life-saving drugs like remdesivir and sometimes tocilizumab, there was an acute shortage, and even till date, procuring those drugs is a big challenge. Amidst all this, what the major learning point is, this is a disease that we are getting to know better and better as the days progress. And I think we will be able to conquer it in no time. And most importantly, we have to keep our confidence, and we shouldn't lose our heart. Very importantly, the hospitals, in collaboration with the government setup, have to form some kind of a strategy to address whatever the second spike Dr. Subodh and Dr. Edmund were talking about. We need to be prepared. Now that we have already seen one phase of the first corona phase, in case if there is an impending second corona flare-up, we need to be prepared well in advance so that we don't have this much amount of mortality that we are seeing right now.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. True to your name, you stress that we can win over this. We have to be very positive, but of course, amidst all these challenges, that's also, and I know we do not have anybody from the mental health spectrum here to would have wished to have explored that more perhaps. But I'll come back to you on that. And now can I have Dr. Aarti really take us through from her dimension? I'm also told being somebody from internal medicine becomes very crucial at a time like this in terms of when somebody reports. And I will come back to you later, Dr. Vijay, to discuss what you briefly touched upon, what is now being called medical distancing or Medicare distancing, where people are refusing to go to hospital at an early stage of anything because they've been told that you could catch the virus just by going to hospital, because that's a place. So avoid going to hospitals, and that is creating trouble. I'll come back to that. May I now go to Dr. Aarti really to give us a sense of, from the internal medicine perspective, and also as a doctor, how she's coped, what are the lessons learned, what does she think we can all do to generally make life a little safer and better for ourselves in the coming months. Dr. Aarti?
Very good evening, Sriram. Thank you. I think all the panelists have given a briefing of everything we've learned about the pandemic. So being an internist and being in midst of this pandemic. So first question, I mean, we have seen a pandemic sort of situation in 2009. When I was a postgraduate, we were in middle of H1N1 pandemic. At that time also we saw a lot of deaths, and there was a lot of lessons learned at that time. We saw a lot of young people dying of H1N1, especially the 2009 year. But a decade later, something this big as COVID-19 and has come and hit us in face, and we were so unprepared for it. We were totally underprepared. It put out everything that already our healthcare system was such a broken system. And for us to have this kind of pandemic, it completely collapsed the system we have. So the main things is that now that we are in the middle of this pandemic, now the narrative needs to change. The narrative needs to change from the fear, it needs to change to hope. The narrative needs to completely change. We can't be fearful. I know it has been, there's a lot of stigma attached to it. There has been a lot of tragedy. We are losing a lot of lives. But somewhere we know that this is going to be there for some time. It's not going to go away. So because it's going to be here, we need to transform it into some sort of hope. Rather than the fear and tragedy, we need to transform it into a story of hope. And that is possible only if we start to look at everything from the grassroots levels. If we start looking at everything, this can transform. There need to be a collective work. We need to do a lot of collective work with the government, doctors, healthcare workers at a low level. Everyone needs to work together to transform this narrative. There has been so much of fear, people dying. So, but the bigger picture is that this is a virus. We didn't know much. Maybe if we had the similar situation in March, we were so underprepared. We didn't know about how this disease is going to progress, how the patients are going to present, what are we going to do. But that lockdown period, because the infectivity rate was less, and somehow, we peaked later. We knew this is going to happen. I think everybody, all the doctors knew that we are going to reach a stage where we're going to treat hundreds and hundreds of patients. Everybody knew that in March. We didn't want that to happen, but everybody could predict once the lockdown is over, we are going to face this. So the thing is, we were underprepared. The time gave us some sort of preparation. We learned lessons from the other countries, how to treat these patients, whom to catch on early, when to investigate them. So we learned few of those things over a period of months. So by the time we peaked, we had at least some clue how to go about it. So when at SLG hospitals, we decided we're going to take COVID patients, we were ready with the protocols. If a patient is going to come in, we're going to, this is how the treatment is going to go on: mild, moderate, severe. We're going to treat them on these basis. And the treatment, as Dr. Jagan and Dr. Vijay said, even today, procuring drugs like tocilizumab, getting remdesivir has become very difficult. We were at a point when we had to search everywhere, including the black markets, to get the drugs, because one of our patient, postpartum lady, we lost her. We were in dire need of getting drugs. We were dire need of getting tocilizumab for her, but we finally couldn't procure it. So there was such a shortage, and I think this was July first week. There was complete shortage of all the drugs. People were selling it in black market. So the pandemic for me has brought out that there are two sides to it. There's a lot of exploitation which is happening also by not giving this to general public, needy people. At the same time, very kind stories. People have come forward to donate plasma, and we're trying to help others. So we've learned lessons that one of the main things I felt that we completely lack skilled people in our country. When I say the outcomes are not great because I'm going to give tocilizumab or remdesivir or what treatment, the outcomes are better when we have very good skilled nursing staff. At one point, we had skilled nursing staff, people coming into ICUs, but within a week, they fell sick. And the next round of skilled staff were not available. I mean, that took us some more time. So the biggest lesson for me is that we need to empower everyone, your ground staff, that is your housekeeping, nursing staff, everybody should be trained in monitoring the ICU patients, monitoring in terms of pandemic. So skilled staff is something I think we needed much more. Going forward into the pandemic, we need more skilled people, more people who are going to learn and reskill themselves. If they were a normal nursing staff, they should reskill themselves into ICU nursing. So somewhere we need to train them to be skilled people. So the biggest lessons for me is that we need to empower each one of them, so that in terms of, we had so many doctors falling sick, we had all the nursing supervisors fell sick particular week, and then we again had to train some more people, get in more people. So somewhere that skilled people is what I think will make a difference in pandemics like this. So that is one of the biggest lessons I feel.
Thank you, Dr. Aarti. Now I know why you must also be so successful as a blogger, and it's a nice thing you see about Dr. Edmund or Dr. Aarti, that besides their focus on their profession, they also take a lot of time and effort to take their wisdom and learning and knowledge and share it with people of different spheres, of course their own profession, but also general public, government, etc. So I can imagine what makes you a successful blogger also. So great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sriram.
But when I looked at all the answers, and it's kind of both frightening and something that gives you a sense of hope also, that this is something Dr. Jagan Mohan said, Dr. Vijay said, and Dr. Aarti emphasized, that the first response to a pandemic or to a crisis has been that there are certain elements in society who can see very, very short-term benefits and create a situation that makes a pandemic worse, that makes a crisis far worse than it already is. A shortage of medicines, losing people because you can't get a particular medicine, or the extraordinary escalation of costs of masks or sanitizers or vitamin C tablets, etc., has also taught us that we have to be very about, but that is clearly something not what hospitals can do, but the government and other instruments of society must act in. But I'll go to you, Dr. Somaraju, and then on that I'll come to Dr. Subodh and Dr. Edmund as well. And this is this dimension about trust. If you see it from an outsider, somebody, a commoner like me, a common person in the streets, whether it's in villages, towns, or cities, there is a perception where the trust in the healthcare system is really, has really been shaken. On one hand, people believe that government hospitals are a big danger for reasons of inefficiency, of lack of commitment of people working there towards the patients, corruption. On the other hand, there is a perception about private sector that the care will be very good, but is it affordable? There are stories, some real, some not real, the myth perhaps, but the perception is that you could lose a lot to save your life at a private hospital. So like Dr. Somaraju to begin with, and then I'd like Dr. Subodh and Dr. Edmund to kind of bring this aspect. What do we do with this? On one hand, it must cost hospitals certain amount of money to provide health care. It has a particular cost. On the other hand, there is a perception that we are being overcharged. There are a lot of dimensions, of course, not just pandemic, even normal times. Increasingly, this is a generation of doctors that is doing away with any kind of clinical medicine practice. They're over-dependent on diagnostics, resorting to unnecessary surgeries, etc., overcharging in hospitals of PPE kits or, and so on and so forth. So one is during the pandemic and even otherwise, how do we address this issue of costs and ethical practice of business by hospitals? So I'll go to you, Dr. Somaraju, but after that I'll ask Dr. Subodh and Dr. Edmund to address this issue of ethics and the perception of a common person. If I go to hospital, they'll rob me.
So, coming to this question, I really don't accept saying that government hospitals have not done anything good for the people, because as Dr. Vijay and Dr. Jagan and Dr. Arati says, it's a pandemic situation. We don't know what kind of treatment we need to give it to any particular patient. And government, according to me, the central government or the state governments had done a fantastic job by educating all of us, saying that they have taken the responsibility and they have not permitted private hospitals to do this. They got exposed. They have treated people. They had treated lakhs and crores of people, and 95% of them are comfortable, happy, back home to their normalcy. And coming to the private hospitals overcharging and all, you also need to understand that everything, there is a treatment, there is a cost involved in that. And for example, when we say the Remdesivir was not available last time, it went to the black market, and 30,000 medicine, very few patients of us bought at 90,000 and 1 lakh rupees, and they had provided, and that is the government subject where how do they control this black market. And coming into the private sector, how it will work, we successfully, proudly, we say last 1.5 months we are giving treatment for COVID patients. We have our doctors are the front-end warriors, and our housekeeping staff or nursing staff. Even though the situation, Dr. Arati says, there are one time all the nursing supervisors got sick, and within 4 or 5 days they are back, and they have done their best, and successfully we have treated more than 450 patients in this scenario. And it is a very good number, because if you talk about a SLG hospital is a very brand new hospital. We have international designed hospital taking care of every aspect, and our standards are very high. As Arati said, before we started the COVID, we had all the protocols in place, and then started and then implemented successfully. And coming to the overcharging and all, there are few costs which are unexpectedly we have to pay to various doctors, because we not only doctors, nurses, housekeeping staff, we have to pay little extra, so the cost has increased. Earlier, our costs used to be around 8,000, 9,000 rupees per bed if it is occupied, but that has gone up drastically. Because of that, there will be little charges, but the satisfaction of the patient when he is coming out of problem is the fantastic thing that money cannot give. And you cannot generalize all the hospitals are overcharging. See, for example, there were few cases we have handled, and there will be a multiple angle, not only COVID related. Once they admitted in the COVID ward, they might be having neuro problem, they might be having neuro problem, they have urology problem, they might be having a cardiac problem. If it is all combined together, the treatment cost also will increase. And the main thing what we calculated in our hospital, like many other hospitals, they did not accept insurance. We have accepted insurance because insurance prices are less, and compared to other hospitals, we had followed all government norms, whatever government has been decided to take the charges, and we have done that. And looking in the future also, how we planned ourselves beyond pandemic also. Actually our hospital is fully equipped with the latest technology of any kind of equipment we have. And our fundamental philosophy in SLG is to give affordable health care to the needy. So at any given point of the time, our hospital will be the most reasonable hospital in the entire South India, I proudly say. And maybe in future we'll go into the next level of into national level and international level also. Hope I have answered your this thing.
Yes, I noticed the point Dr. Edmund made earlier, that he's a little careful and gives his disclaimers before speaking to me because I'm a journalist. Let me tell you something that has to be said, and I understand you will possibly not say it, but our government, and I can speak about the state government of Telangana because I'm based in Hyderabad, has been a failure in a miserable way. I've said it for the last 150 days through my paper, on television. A scatological survey a few days ago says maybe we had about 6 to 9 lakh people affected by the virus. The government surveys, their refusal to test, their insistence that certain categories, including the dead, not be tested, have led to the collapse of the contact management completely. But I know you didn't say all of it. I am saying it. So we'll leave it there. But I'll go to you, Dr. Subodh, and then Dr. The issue, like Dr. Somaraju said, is there will be a logical dimension to the rationale of costing, cost going up. But the issue is of perception also. It's a perception that government hospitals are inefficient. Whereas I know there are people who have said, and I'll also say this in all fairness, that perhaps Gandhi Hospital performed extremely well despite all these challenges in the last 150 days. Perhaps NIMS, which takes care of all the government employees who fall prey to COVID from police, has done well. There are shortcomings which we expose fine, but they've done well. But the perception about government hospitals is of inefficiency and corruption and fear. 3 ministers and 11 MLAs so far have refused to go to a government hospital run by their own government. One minister, I won't quote his name or the hospital, but they put it in the paper without saying which hospital, that he said, I don't mind losing my ministry position, but I don't want to die. About his own health minister's promise that Gandhi is for everybody. Anyway, leave it. We'll discuss government some other platform. Perception, private sector hospitals, I go, there's a feeling, and some people tell me from the finance sector that P's have started funding hospitals. There's a rising cost. I'm not saying this particular hospital, obviously, but there's a perception that the targets per bed, per patient, per doctor, pushing, costs, etc. So please bring to us, how do we, without again advocating government, the moment you advocate government, then everything goes to a different level of disaster altogether. Keeping the government out, leaving hospitals free to a large extent, how do we ensure a sense of fairness? I would normally advocate free market, but in the context of healthcare, you are not in a position to make a rational decision. You can't visit 5 hospitals, gauge different doctors and plans of treatment, compare them, and then choose. So in that context, how do we ensure ethical, fair pricing for people across the country from the private health sector, and not just as exceptions like SLG 1 hospital or 2 hospitals or a few hospitals going out of the way to be very ethical, but at large. So this is the question, Dr. Subodh.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to take just 1 minute to go back to 2 years back to our national health policy. I think what was told in the national policy was forget about COVID or a pandemic. I think we need to get universal health coverage by 2030 or 2025. And you cannot achieve that without bringing the private sector, which government had already agreed. So I think there is no question about leaving out the private sector. this whole discussion about private sector right now, maybe a particular context, but if you look at the Ayushman Bharat program, this program, we did it, Telangana government did it 10 years back with Arogyasri. The whole model is now, what does the implications of the program? Look at how amount of mortality which we have saved. I think there's been a lot of studies which has looked into it. People are now free to go to any private hospital and get treatment. And you all know that Hyderabad has the best health facility in Asia itself. And you take away private sector right now and say that, okay, everybody can go to this government hospital, we are going to be in a big trouble. And as a couple of my other panelists said, as situations go worse, you have to bring the private sector, and not just, we are only talking about the tertiary corporate here. What about the nursing hospitals? What about the nursing clinics? What about the charity hospitals? They are all willing to help because this is a health emergency. I am personally in touch with a lot of private sector who are willing to do. But the only modus operandi, can we do a forceful taking over of private beds? What has happened in Kerala, in Maharashtra, is the private hospital is voluntarily given. I use the word voluntary here because they said, yes, take our 50 beds, but give us a fair pricing. You can't say like we have to do social service, because hospitals also have to run their thing. So what we have done is, we have a model of Arogyasri. Andhra Pradesh is doing it, Maharashtra is doing it, Kerala is doing it, where they have actually fixed packages, where you could have a negotiation with the government. Private sector can sit. I think they had some negotiation recently, but I think you should have a negotiation by saying, yes, this could be the COVID rate. These are the extra charges which are coming. When you are charging 1.5 lakhs for a bypass surgery, according to Arogyasri, as per the Arogyasri rate, you can have a COVID rate, because at the end of the day, I personally feel you have to bring in the private sector. You have to have that collaboration, because keeping them out and keeping in two different spectrum is not this. Definitely, yes, in Arogyasri, in Ayushman Bharat, there are mechanisms of blacklisting. Any patient who complains that a private sector has overdone it, there is something called a blacklisting of a hospital. So because now private sector is not linked to the Arogyasri in COVID treatment, there is a little bit of miscommunication and this perception. But I personally feel, whether it is Ayushman Bharat, whether it's Arogyasri, whether it's Vajpayee Arogyasri in whether it's any other state schemes, you will see that private sector has played a very big role in reduction of mortality. What is required is a sort of a coming to the same platform. And I personally feel you need to have, and Telangana has been a government which has done extremely well in public-private partnerships. Whether you take the dialysis program, whether it's 108 ambulance program, I think we have been the forefront of all these programs. So I think what is required is come to a common platform, understand that private sector is not just for charity, give them the proper share. And I'm telling you, more than private sector is going to come and help the government is what I perceive.
Thank you, Dr. Subodh. Nice to be told and bring a good perspective that Telangana, Hyderabad are very important centers for healthcare, not just for the state and the country, but in the continent. We were talking about medical tourism as a driver. Remember, a couple of years back onwards, till this pandemic came in, everybody looks forward to Hyderabad becoming that healthcare capital of Asia, if possible, and that'll be wonderful. And you're right, without the private sector, we are doomed. But at the same time, how do we get this? This will be interesting. I go to Dr. Edmund to kind of just take it forward from here. We have heard the perspective of hospitals and policymakers say there's a possibility to get this sense of ethical. But I'm again going back to ask you, Dr. Edmund. This perception is also based on a lot of lies and myths and untruth about done through arts, through politics, and how does healthcare address this?
So, firstly, what we need to understand is that government sector and private sector should not be compared, for a simple reason that government sector institutions are for public service, and private sector institutions, including hospitals, are not there for charity. They are in the business of healthcare. So let us be conscious and mindful of this fact that it is we the people who pushed this private sector hospitals into stock markets as well. So they are also accountable to their investors. They are accountable to their stakeholders. And if the hospitals are not posting profits, there's a direct influence on the stakeholders and investors saying that, you know what, our money is stuck here. So this is a ecosystem created by us for us. So for civilian expectations to be met from private sector alone in terms of affordability and accessibility would be wrong. Secondly, looking at how government hospitals are positioned, if in 70 years of independence, comparing both the Congress government, the BJP government, or any of them, healthcare has never been an electoral issue. For us, electoral issue is Hindu, Muslims, and all those kind of things. We've never talked about, okay, if healthcare is a state subject as per the 7th schedule of the Constitution, what is it that the Congress government will give me, or what is it that the BJP government will give me in terms of healthcare? If I go to a government hospital, can I get a private ward, or any of these things have never been a matter of debate, unlike what we saw in Obamacare. So unless healthcare becomes an electoral issue, government hospitals are going to continue being on ventilator mode. I've traveled to the length and breadth of many of the government hospitals in Karnataka and in different parts of India. And you get different shades of what I could put Hyderabadi biryani flavors. You get different shades of them. And you'll be perplexed saying that, oh my God, back in Mangalore, this is how it was. Back in Bellary, this is how it is. Back in Patna, this is how it is. And it comes back to a conscience saying that what do we as citizens of India expect from governments to drive our healthcare mandate? Are we very comfortable? Are we not? A lot of private sector doctors were scared after the pandemic emerged. So let us understand that COVID-19, although WHO called it novel, it wasn't very novel. It was seen before. It was found historically. We've had outbreaks of Middle East respiratory syndrome. We've had Nipah virus. We've had Zika virus. We've had Ebola. We've had a lot of these things of pandemic proportion, if not pandemic, maybe endemic, to address my critics. But nevertheless, it was governance lethargy. When I'm telling governance lethargy, I'm not pointing out at the Indian government alone, but governments around the world, saying that, you know what, we are prepared for anything or we can do anything. That's the mindset that governments brought to the table. And if this mindset grew and got cultivated, it's because people allowed it to cultivate. We've never held people accountable. Have we ever seen a member of parliament being held saying that, hey, what have you done to healthcare in a constituency? Never. Even as we talk today, we've never had this situation. Muzaffarpur, we've had so many children die. Gorakhpur, we've had children die. But what does it become? It simply becomes a memory. It becomes a memory. It becomes a nice new story to be written about, to be talked about, to be discussed at dinner tables. But beyond that, what? What doctors today need to understand is that we are fighting a war against COVID. You may be anybody under the discipline of medicine, but if you are a soldier in this process, you don't run away from it. A lot of senior doctors do not turn up to hospitals, which does not annoy me but amuse me. Just imagine a situation that the country is at war, and then the soldiers going to war say that, hey, you know what, I might die because of this. The bullet might hit, there might be an ambush, and I might just pass off, so I'll not go to war at all. So healthcare is the same thing. Currently today we are at war, irrespective of who's on the front line, who's on any of those lines. You have to go to war. So there's no point drawing sympathy or empathy out of it, saying that we are overworked. No, I think that's wrong. There's no doctor out there doing charity saying that, okay, I'm not going to take next many months of salary. You are being paid for what you're supposed to do. So might as well do it.
Thank you, Dr. Edmund. You don't have to ever be worried about me making anything you say controversial. That was one of the most intrepid speech I've heard from any person, from any profession in this country in a long time. Now, I'll veer towards safety and go away from some of the things you've said. And that much I hope to the people who have provided me with this opportunity in the interest that they give me an opportunity to come back to moderate another debate again. I will not take off on anything Dr. Edmund said and instead move to Dr. Jagan, for example, to ask him. This issue has come from a lot of people about healthcare during a pandemic like COVID, which is not related to COVID. Elective surgeries, for example, of other disciplines. Should people come to a hospital and get, Dr. Vijay said, for example, dialysis? What about certain things, for example, deliveries, pregnancy, some things can't stop, but suppose I have pain in my tooth or eyes, or should I go to hospital? Should I get checked up? Should I go for surgeries? Is it a risk not to do it? Or what is the risk if I go ahead and do it? Or does it affect us? Can we just put a moratorium on all elective surgeries for 6 months and say, stay away, the whole hospital infrastructure is fighting COVID? How do we go about it?
Yes.
And also, if you could give me a sense on are there ways in which you can specifically reduce costs at the hospital level?
Yes.
The way you design your reception, the way you arrange your staff, the process of admission, or even how your operation theater is, has it changed? Should it change? What can we do?
Yes. It's a very good question.
Dr. Jagan Mohan.
Yes, sir. So can you hear me? Yeah. During this pandemic, at the beginning of this pandemic, in the month of April and May, the total shutdown of the elective surgeries.
Dr. Jagan.
What is elective surgery? Means it is a non-emergencies, like knee arthritis, hip arthritis, hernia, varicocele, like that. This is not a life-threatening or limb-threatening surgeries. They are all quality improvement surgeries. When at the beginning of this pandemic, in the month of April and May, whole hospitals are filled with the COVID cases, and most of the hospitals have shut down. Healthcare professionals are on leave or on sick leave. They don't have enough capacity to do these elective surgeries. Initially, they thought this pandemic will go only for a few months, but later they realized, even the WHO said it will last for years. Probably we don't know how many years it will last, maybe 2 years, 3 years, or 10 years, we don't know. Even if vaccine comes this year, it takes at least 2 to 3 years to flatten, to completely eradicate this pandemic. The person cannot wait that much long time. He cannot wait for years together to get operated for his or her elective surgeries. For example, if we take our specialty orthopedics, the patient with a knee arthritis, a disabled arthritis, where the patient can't do their daily activities, he can't go for a shopping, he can't drop their grandchildren to the school or picking up, or they can't do small things, their mobility will come down because of the arthritis. They can't wait for 2 years, 3 years for the surgery. So at some point of time, we have to restart the elective surgeries. Most of this in UK, the pandemic has come down, they have restarted the elective surgeries. In India also, some places, they have restarted the elective surgeries because the amount of new cases is coming up, but the severity of the cases are coming down. We have beds are available for non-COVID cases. So how to do these elective surgeries? Is it safe to do in this pandemic, or they have to wait for years together? No, we can do safely in this pandemic. So how to do these elective surgeries? We have to prepare the patient for these elective surgeries. We have to educate them, and we have to screen them. We have to isolate them before surgery. Screening for the COVID cases, COVID whether the patient is having or not, and prepare the patient, and minimal stay in the hospital. So what is a minimal stay? They have to be done with well-equipped modern equipment. For example, in our hospital, SLG hospitals, we got latest equipment. With that, we can reduce the operative time. We can give a small incision, minimal invasive, navigated surgeries, robotic surgery, that will help in quick recovery. That is a program called enhanced recovery. The patient will be admitted on the day, surgery will be done in the morning, patient will be mobilized in the evening, discharged next day. The stay will be very minimal so that the risk of exposure to the hospital-acquired diseases, hospital-acquired infections, or the COVID very minimal. The patient will also get a confidence. As you all know that life is a moment is a life. We have to give back the life to the patient. It's a quality improvement surgeries. We have to stop at some point of time. So because of this modern equipment, new technique, enhanced recovery programs can safely do these elective surgeries. So how to prepare these elective surgeries in this COVID pandemics? There are three sectors. One is a patient sector, health professionals, and the infrastructure. The patient structure-wise, patient has to be educated, social distancing, sanitation, protection, and education. And patient should be strict by appointment, limitation of the patient and patient attendance, only one attendant. And patient should be tagged. When entered into the hospital, he should be monitored, tagged where he is going, and very minimal movement in the hospital. For example, if you are sending for a CT scan, an MRI, or a blood test, it also should be appointment by strict. For example, for this particular time, he got an MR scan. Each stride goes from the ward to the MR scan room and it comes out. It will be monitored with the tag system so that the exposure to the infections will be minimal. And the healthcare professionals. Healthcare professionals, not only the doctors, it's a teamwork. It includes the nurses, includes the physiotherapists, includes the ward boys, includes the domestic cleaners, all forms a unit. It's a healthcare unit, it's a multidisciplinary team. They all should be well educated. How to protect themselves, how to protect others, how to prevent the spread of infections. They should be donning and doffing. That is for the preparation of the healthcare professionals. And the very important is preparation of the infrastructure, how the hospitals should redesign for this future pandemic, future non-emergencies, future elective surgeries. There should be strict watertight or airtight compartments for the COVID cases and the non-COVID cases. In the non-COVID cases also, there should be separate entry, separate exit. There should be tagging system for the patient and patient attendants. All areas should be redesigned. Good ventilation, cross ventilation, theater should be redesigned with the negative suction, and the proper donning area, doffing area, shower area should be redesigned, and minimal flow of the patients. And even OP areas also, there should be proper protection, and wide open areas and wide cross ventilated areas. If you take all these precautions,
Dr. Jagan, I'll kind of have you got. We got a sense of what you're saying that we can't forever push the elective surgeries to the back burner. This crisis will go on.
Yes.
Hospitals have to start gearing up, and there are many things that can be done.
Yeah.
And just in the interest of time, I'll now quickly start rushing forward. I have a lot of things to ask each one of you.
Yes.
But you'll understand when I say that I'll also have to open it to the audience who've been watching us to ask questions. I was, Dr. Vijay, very quickly, about a minute maybe, could you speak to us about this thing Dr. Jagan said from a surgery perspective, but there is seeing that there's a kind of medical distancing, that's the word being used, where patients are not coming to the hospital. The situation gets worse. They come only when there's an emergency. How do we fight this medical distancing phenomenon?
So basically, during the lockdown time, the government has been very successful in educating the people regarding the various strategies, social distancing, trying to make sure that you are sanitizing your houses, your premises. So what this has done is, once the lockdown was removed and then there was a surge of cases, there is an immense fear that is there in the public that once you go to the hospital, the chances of acquiring the infection is higher. Obviously, as for reasons known, anyone who would walk on the road would be more prone for an accident than someone who is walking on the pavement. So, keeping that in mind, you need to understand that this is valid only for diseases which are self-limiting and for which medical supervision even over the phone would be sufficient. But whereas for diseases which are dire emergencies, you cannot avoid a medical consultation. See, we have had incidents wherein people who are cardiac patients, who have had heart attacks, who failed to come to the hospital just for the fear of getting exposed to the COVID. And there are dialysis patients who have skipped their sessions and then lost lives at home. So what we need to really understand and inculcate the new thought process among all our colleagues and the whole public is that we need to start talking about maintain social distance, but please avoid medical distancing. What I mean by this is we need to make sure that people attend to their medical emergencies, if not for their regular medical needs. That could be definitely done over the phone. You can have a video consultation now. Obviously, your physical contact with the patient and then the eye-to-eye contact with the patient wouldn't be that great when you're doing it over the phone. But taking this pandemic into consideration, we need to start thinking about this and make sure, educate people that if it's an emergency and something alarming, please don't neglect. And now I think we are getting to a stage wherein all hospitals are having good protocols, and then we have a separate COVID and a non-COVID. The precautions are being taken care. It's not just for the people. See, even medical staff, take it from the housekeeping to the nursing to the doctors. All of us are human beings, and we also wouldn't want to get exposed to a COVID patient. Okay, someone in the garb of a heart attack, if he comes with a COVID, we are equally exposed. We wouldn't want to treat that patient. But we need to understand very clearly the responsibility has to be from both sides.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. I absolutely appreciate it. Priya, before I get back to you on question answers, I'd like to ask Dr. Aarti the last question. Since Dr. Vijay brought it, Dr. Aarti, quickly run us through in a minute or so the whole dimension of online consulting, telephonic consulting, technology-aided virtual consulting. What are the skills required from the hospital side and how reliable is it? What are the things we can go through? Very quickly, I know it's a very vast subject, but to you, Dr. Aarti, for a last question for this session.
Right. Yeah, Sriram, it's a very relevant question at this point. Last few months, we've been geared up to do the teleconsultations. So like anything which we are doing virtually, there are going to be pros and cons. For regular patients like diabetic patients who've been doing well, for them to come for regular follow-ups, diabetic, thyroid, hypertension, or an ischemic heart disease who are doing well, we've been doing teleconsultations and we are asking them to continue the regular medications. They show us the blood reports. We're able to do that. So that part of it where people need regular follow-ups, for them it works out well. Even for fevers, whatever we are able to do teleconsultations, we're able. So the skill that is required for that is the communication. The patient and the attenders or people who are there with them should be clearly able to communicate what their problem is. Thankfully, the technology has progressed so much. Most of these apps, what we use like M-Fine, Practo, come with a lot of, there is a lot of history they need to fill in. There's a lot of details which is given, so which makes it easy for us. But the skill here is both to take the relevant history from them and also be able to pick it up. So, and most of the times, when we feel something is suspicious or we suspect something, we ask them to come for a regular visit. So the communication is the skill set here, and somewhere the health literacy, this is one concept I just want to tell briefly, that a lot of people, the health literacy, that is knowing more about your health, is something which everybody should know something about their health, and knowing the right kind of information, not reading everything which is there on the internet, self-diagnose, treat yourself, or, come up. So when they come, I know what is the relevant question to ask them, and if the patient also asks relevant questions, I'm very happy. So somewhere that is where the health literacy needs to come up. I think maybe with more online, with more experience in online consultations, we'll be getting close to that. Right now, all the patients who are getting discharged are doing follow-ups with us online. COVID patients who have gone home, we are monitoring them through online consultations. So we have come a long way from where it was before. I think this seems to be the future, but we need to. Also, one more point I wanted to add here was maybe the AI and this two-tier cities is where maybe we need to have these consoles where we can monitor ICU patients from far away. There are all these things coming up. I think this is the future where it is. So that's about the teleconsultation.
Thank you, Dr. Aarti. And Priya, you should take this as a suggestion that maybe there can be a 1.5 hour discussion only on using of technology in healthcare. So many aspects can be addressed. It was a great pleasure. Thank you. I hand it over to you and repeat the 3 most important things we've heard from all these people. 1, do not neglect health concerns of the non-coronavirus kind, whether it is issues of lung or heart or anything. Please do consult a doctor or hospital. You can use technology, but don't use it so much that after reading WebMD for 7 minutes, you think you are a doctor by yourself. No. So please go to a doctor, please go to a hospital, get regular checkups, use technology, avoid it, but don't forget hospitals have made sure at least now that they're very safe. You can consult with them. The second thing is there is going to be a cost involved in a private health sector context. Government should understand this. Everybody should understand this. However, it is for the hospitals to also rise up to the occasion. And as we couldn't have had, nobody could have said it better when Dr. Edmond said, this is a war against coronavirus. And doctors and nurses and paramedics, everybody in the healthcare industry is a soldier. And there is a conduct of a soldier of honor and nobility. And I think everybody should stand up to it. And finally, the most significant thing is coronavirus isn't ending very soon. It isn't going to go away as quickly as you and I would like it to be so. Please be careful. Please take care. And with that, I hand it over to Dr. Priya and kindly take us through the question and answers of all the people who are wanting to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sriram, and thank you, panelists. I'll quickly move on to the question answer session. Some of these questions had come with the registration itself. Some of them have been answered by our panelists. I will take the ones that are kind of relevant and still have gone unanswered. Dr. Aarti Faniraja Alam is asking, what is the role of plasma in COVID treatment? As an internist, I thought you would be able to answer this.
Right, yeah. So, before I talk about plasma, we are doing a lot of polypharmacy in COVID-19. We don't have any clear guidelines. I mean, we don't have large trials. What we are doing is still at a very basic level. We don't have trials to say this is going to work, this is not going to work. And government also has been very quick in approving FabiFlu, that is Favipiravir. Government quickly approved Tocilizumab, which I don't know if it is the right way to go about. We need much more data to say that, this will work. Coming to plasma, it's the exact same problem that, the trials doesn't show a great improvement. Mild to moderate cases, it says there is a role of, some role of improvement. But again, clearly, we don't have enough data to say this is going to work for sure. We only have to wait and see. We are offering plasma therapy to some patients of moderate disease where other therapies have failed. Sometimes before giving Tocilizumab, also we are offering plasma therapy. But again, it has been very individual based. So based on few patients who improved, I can't say this is going to work for sure. And again, because it didn't work, I can't say it doesn't work. We have to wait for RCTs. We have to wait for the data coming in. Only then we can say it does work. Yeah.
Thank you, doctor. Moving on, we have a question from Amirineni Satyanarayana. He's asking, no hospital is admitting people with other ailments without a COVID test. How is that possible, especially in emergencies? Somaraju Garu, would you want to take that? You'll need to unmute. Yes.
The thing is, it is a protocol. It is for the safety of the doctors who are working on that patient. It is for the safety of the environment where a lot of other people are involved. Like for example, if you see one by chance one heart attack patient had come with the thing. In that moment, how do we do a swab test or anything? It is a very difficult situation. And when that person goes to the surgery, if that person required a surgery, then obviously this test is a mandatory. It is good for the patient and for the environment altogether. So it is easy and it doesn't cost much as well. So it is from the hospital side, we recommend them to do a test which is safer for the patient as well as the people who are, if for example, if a person goes for a surgery and there will be around 30 to 40 people involvement is there in that, whether nurses, housekeeping, paramedical staff or biomedical engineers or whoever is involved in organizing that thing, they are at little fear factor, whatever they will be having, that will be gone if the test is there. Then the confidence level of the doctor increases, the confidence level of the people who are working around them will increase, the surgery will come out of that surgery will be, the protective is coming out of that surgery will be very high. So from the hospital side, we definitely recommend having this test.
I think his question was more from the time taken perspective rather than the cost.
Time taking is also it's part and parcel of that system it need to come out. So, but emergencies, yes, all our doctors are working by taking all the precautions. In emergencies, yes. In electives, it is recommended to have test and then come back.
Thank you. That's quite encouraging. Radha Madhav wants to know, what is the total spending on COVID so far in India? Can a similar amount be invested in building a better healthcare system proactively? Dr. Subodh, I think you should be able to.
Yeah, we do not have much specific data on how much has been spent on COVID except for the Atmanirbhar package and all. But one thing I needed to highlight here is, I think which I missed while talking, if you look at the healthcare system of India compared to other countries, we run a very poor 147. That's what the Lancet data says. We are only 147 out of 190, which means we spend only 1.1% of GDP. Now, what it entails is, already we are in a very weaker system when it comes to healthcare spending. And if at all, there's another issue which as health economists, we deal with it. You may have money, but you may not actually spend everything. You are only spending 50% of what is allotted to the, whether it's to the tertiary care, secondary care or primary care. So there is an issue of underspending, that there is a lack of absorptive capacity, and there is sort of a regional variations. You have a state like Kerala which will stand on top with all the developed countries, but you will also have a state like UP, Bihar, which are running very poor. But what the fundamental question, I think what the question raised was, definitely we need to improve the public health system in the future, because I think this has been the warning bells. If you look at, the focus has been on, say, hospitals and tertiary care, but I think we need to improve our public health system, primary care, secondary care. Now look at a case like Kerala, where the number of cases are also drastically very high. I think the number of cases are increasing. It's been predicted that in another 1 month, there will be 20,000, 30,000 cases, but your mortality rate will be very low, because I think they have actually managed to have district level facilities, because they were already prepared when coming to dealing with the pandemic. So it's all about strengthening our public health systems, not just for this COVID, but I think in anything in the future. I think this is a signal that I think healthcare is going to get a lot of importance in the future.
Thank you. There's another question, very interesting one. P. Jayadurga is asking, in the post-COVID situation of hospital, how do you train and motivate the staff? Who would want to take that question? Yes, Dr. Jagannath. Unmute. Unmute, please.
It's a very good question, how to motivate them. So for that motivation, you required a good leadership. There should be one good leader and frequent meeting with the healthcare professionals, including the doctors, nurses, ward boys, and domestic cleaners. And frequently motivate them. What is their professions? We are in the healthcare profession. We are dealing with the lives of the other people. It is a noble profession. So you have to motivate them first. There is a possibility, there is a risk you are exposing to the COVID cases. There is a risk you may attack. You will see that there is a mortality in the nurses, doctors, and other workers. But motivate them because it is in a noble profession. If a doctor can't work or the nurse can't work, who will work? Somebody has to tackle these COVID cases. So motivate them, constant motivate them, encourage them, and give some incentives and appreciations. And also, if the patient or doctor or nurse or somebody sick, the management has to take over. They should give some treatment. They should give some confidence that if anything goes wrong, if you get infected, we will take care. Your treatment will be absolutely free and we will give the treatment to you. So that confidence should be given, and constant motivation, constant encouragement, give a little bit of certification, incentives, and frequent warm-up rounds that will motivate the staff.
Absolutely, totally agreed. And we do need our frontline warriors like never before.
Yes.
Thank you so much. With that, I will start winding down. Thank you, panelists, for that insightfully prescient dialogue. What we have gathered in a nutshell is that there's an absolute and immediate requirement to bring care, community, and cause to work together seamlessly. That the digital, physical engagement, even public-private engagement will now need to culminate into a very successful marriage. And that we need to build in elasticity into our healthcare and allied workforce in order to meet the big surge right now and when it happens again, if at all. So once again, a big thank you, Dr. Subodh Kandamuthan, TVS Somaraju Garu, Dr. V. Jaganmohan, Dr. P. Vijay Verma, Dr. Aarti Bellari, Dr. Edmund Fernandez for your valuable observations and time. Thank you, Sriram, for maneuvering the conversation so deftly, as always. We are taking back a lot of understanding of what could be. Thank you, Vicky and Akhilesh Mahurkar for hosting the event. Thanks to RBC Worldwide for the event branding and coordination. The members of the media for covering the event. Our gratitude to all of you in the audience for joining us here today.